Imagine climbing the sacred road at Delphi to ask Apollo a question that could decide a war, a marriage, a colony, or the fate of a kingdom. At the top waits the Pythia, seated above the most famous oracle in the Greek world. But the real process was stranger than the familiar image of a woman inhaling mysterious fumes and shouting riddles. Delphi was a ritual system, a political institution, and a place where divine authority still depended on human interpretation. Not a fortune teller in a cave. Delphi was not simply a hidden cave where anyone could walk in and ask the future. It was a major sanctuary of Apollo built into the slopes beneath Mount Parnassus, filled with temples, treasuries, dedications, monuments, sacrifices, officials, visitors, and the wealth of Greek communities from across the Mediterranean. The Pythia stood at the center of that system, but she was not operating alone. A consultation belonged to a sacred institution with rules, ritual preparation, priestly personnel, offerings, and a reputation powerful enough to attract individuals, city-states, and kings. That is the first thing the popular image usually misses. The oracle was not only a mysterious voice. It was an entire religious machine built around the belief that Apollo could answer human questions at Delphi. If you enjoy ancient myths, strange questions, and discovering what the ancient sources actually say, subscribe to Gods and Heroes Unveiled. We explore another mystery of the Greek world in every video. How Apollo took Delphi. The sanctuary's authority began with myth. In the Homeric hymn to Apollo, the god searches for a place where he can establish an oracle for mortals. He eventually reaches Crisa beneath Mount Parnassus and chooses the dramatic landscape as the site of his temple. Nearby lives a monstrous female dragon or serpent. Later tradition gives the creature the familiar name Python, but the hymn itself focuses on Apollo killing the guardian and leaving it to rot in the earth. The story connects the place called Pytho and Apollo's title Pythian with that violent divine conquest. Apollo still needs people to serve the sanctuary. The hymn then tells how he notices Cretan sailors at sea, takes the form of a dolphin, guides their ship toward the coast, reveals himself, and leads them inland to become his servants. It is myth, not an archaeological report, but it explains how Greeks imagined Delphi. Apollo did not merely visit the place. He claimed it, defeated an older power there, founded a sanctuary, and established the human community that would serve his oracle. Other Greek traditions remembered the site's sacred past differently. Some placed earlier prophetic powers such as Earth or Themis before Apollo. Delphi did not have one perfectly fixed origin story. What remained constant was the idea that the place itself was ancient, sacred, and connected to powers deeper than an ordinary temple. Who the Pythia really was. The Pythia was not one legendary woman who lived for centuries. It was an office. A succession of women served as Apollo's prophetic priestess at Delphi. Ancient authors describe the Pythia as the human voice through which the god's counsel was received, but they do not give us one simple biography that applies to every priestess across the oracle's long history. That matters because modern retellings often turn her into a supernatural character rather than a religious official. The woman who became Pythia belonged to a functioning sanctuary. Priests, attendants, sacrificers, consultants, and civic authorities all existed around her. The temple itself had traditions, schedules, sacred property, political relationships, and enormous prestige. Her authority came from the office and from Apollo. When she sat on the tripod, the question was not whether this particular woman had personally learned to predict the future. The religious claim was that the god was making his will accessible through her. To a believer, that distinction changed everything. You were not paying a clever fortune teller for private intuition. You were approaching Apollo through one of the most respected sacred institutions in the Greek world. What a consultation actually required. You could not simply burst into the temple and demand an answer. By the periods for which we have detailed evidence, consultation involved ritual preparation and signs that the god was willing to be approached. Ancient accounts describe sacrifices and preliminary tests before the Pythia proceeded to the prophetic seat. One famous procedure involved a goat. Water was poured over the animal, and a full-body shudder could be taken as a favorable sign. Plutarch preserves a disturbing story in which the signs were wrong. The consultation went forward anyway, and the Pythia suffered a violent collapse. The lesson is important even if every century did not follow an identical procedure. The oracle was conditional. Apollo had to be willing to answer. Offerings mattered. Purification mattered. Sacred order mattered. The consultant entered a system in which ritual failure could mean that the question should not be asked at all. The Pythia also did not perform in the middle of a public theater. The prophetic act belonged to the restricted interior of Apollo's temple, associated in later descriptions with the tripod, laurel, sacred fire, and the innermost space of the sanctuary. What happened there was hidden enough to generate centuries of fascination. And that is exactly why later imagination filled the darkness with smoke, cracks in the earth, ecstatic screams, and secret priestly translation. What did the Pythia actually say? This is where the simple movie version becomes unreliable. Ancient sources preserve oracles in many polished forms, including verse. But that does not prove that every consultation followed one identical chain in which the Pythia babbled incoherently and male priests translated her noises into elegant poetry. We cannot reconstruct every consultation. Plutarch, who actually served at Delphi, discusses why the oracle of his own era often spoke in prose rather than the famous poetic style associated with earlier times. His discussion only makes sense because the form of the response could change. The Pythia was believed to speak under Apollo's inspiration. Priests and temple personnel were part of the institution. Written and oral responses could circulate afterward. But the evidence does not justify one universal mechanical formula for how every word moved from god to priestess to consultant. That uncertainty is more interesting than the stereotype. The oracle worked because people accepted a chain of sacred authority. A question entered Apollo's sanctuary. A response emerged carrying the god's prestige. Then the most dangerous stage began. Someone had to decide what the answer meant. Why the answer sounded so ambiguous. Delphi became famous for answers that could be devastatingly difficult to interpret. Herodotus gives the classic example of Croesus, king of Lydia. Before attacking Persia, Croesus consulted Delphi and received an answer that crossing the Halys River would destroy a great empire. He crossed. A great empire was destroyed. His own. Whether every word of that famous oracle was preserved exactly as spoken is a separate historical question. What matters is how the story teaches Greeks to think about prophecy. Divine knowledge may be true, while human interpretation remains dangerously wrong. The same pattern appears in Herodotus' account of Athens during the Persian invasion. The Delphic response spoke of a wooden wall. Athenians argued over what it meant. Themistocles persuaded them to understand the wooden wall as their fleet, turning interpretation into strategy. This is the crucial point. An oracle did not remove human decision-making. It could make the decision even more intense. Words from Delphi carried extraordinary authority, but people still had to debate them, apply them, and sometimes discover only afterward that they had heard exactly what they wanted to hear. That is why ambiguity was not necessarily a weakness of the oracle. It was part of its power. A flexible answer could survive events in ways a precise prediction could not. And a difficult answer forced the consultant to participate in creating its meaning. Were there really sacred vapors? Now we reach the most famous modern theory. Ancient and later descriptions connect Delphi with a chasm, unusual exhalations, or a sacred vapor associated with the Pythia's inspiration. For a long time, modern scholars doubted the physical part of that story because early excavators did not find the dramatic underground fissure they expected. Then geology reopened the question. Researchers identified faults beneath the Delphic area and reported hydrocarbon gases, including ethylene, in nearby spring environments. That made it plausible that ancient stories about natural emissions were not invented from nothing. But plausible is not the same as proven. We do not know that every Pythia entered trance because of one specific gas. We do not know that ethylene alone explains centuries of prophetic practice. And the archaeological and geological evidence cannot turn a complex religious institution into a simple chemical trick. The safest conclusion is more modest. Delphi sits in an active geological landscape. Ancient people associated the sanctuary with powerful features of the earth. Natural emissions may have contributed to the sensory experience or to later explanations of inspiration. But the oracle's authority came from far more than whatever may have risen from the ground. Why Delphi had so much power? Delphi mattered because the Greeks made it matter. The sanctuary became pan-Hellenic, drawing visitors and offerings from many communities that were often political rivals. Treasuries and monuments along the sacred way displayed wealth, gratitude, competition, memory, and prestige. At the center stood Apollo's oracle and the omphalos, the stone associated with Delphi's claim to be the center, or navel, of the world. Kings asked questions. Cities asked questions. Colonists sought guidance. Communities consulted Delphi about war, law, ritual, purification, and public decisions. That did not mean every Greek obeyed every oracle automatically. Stories about Delphi are full of argument, manipulation, misunderstanding, bribery accusations, political pressure, and failed interpretation. Yet the institution endured for centuries because it occupied a rare position. It was local and pan-Hellenic at the same time, religious and political, mysterious and highly organized. Human voices spoke, but the authority was Apollo's. That is what really happened at the Oracle of Delphi. Not one woman alone in a smoky cave, magically announcing an unavoidable future, but a sacred institution where ritual, landscape, politics, interpretation, and belief met in one of the most powerful places in the ancient Greek world. Which part of Delphi interests you most? The Pythia, the ambiguous prophecies, or the mystery of the sacred vapors? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to see another Greek belief become a real ritual practice, watch our video on why ancient Greeks put coins with the dead next.